Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the myths or stories that might live inside of you is this idea of, in order to make a change, you have to hit bottom. You have to get so miserable that you'll make a change because anything else is unbearable. And we're super familiar with that from an addiction model. So you take the alcoholic, and there's this notion that the person has to hit bottom. Don't go enabling them until they do. They need to be motivated to change. And as someone who loves someone who's wrestling with addiction, there's wisdom in not being more motivated for them to make a life change because you see how something is hurting them than they're motivated. Because this could apply to any area of life, breaking up with the unpleasant partner, or quitting a miserable job, or a way that someone's treating their body. Like, it's really easy to look out from the outside and go, wow, I see how much this is hurting you. I would so love to see you make a change. And I've certainly been in the position where a friend expressed that they wanted to make a change, and they intended to make a change, and then they didn't make the change. And I figured they just needed more support to make the change they said they wanted to make, and spent an unreasonable amount of energy leading the charge to help them to make this life change, only to realize that they weren't with me. They weren't even on the field, and I was charging forward with all of my resourcefulness and support, and here's how we can make a plan, and I'll help you, and I'll be with you every step of the way. So it is good to have an awareness of that model, that people may need to hit bottom. They may need to get so miserable with what isn't working. But what's sort of hidden by that model is there are people who have addiction issues with alcohol who wake up one day and just decide that that's just not how they want to live anymore. They've had enough. They're done, and they start course correcting. There's a lovely program by a woman. Her book is called A Happier Life, and she just puts herself on a path of realizing how much it's hurting her. And it's a really hard path, but then she made this amazing program to help women who didn't necessarily resonate with AA, who want to make that kind of change. And it's this beautiful, life-affirming, not just, white knuckle it, don't drink, but really get clear about the life that you would love to be living and start investing in that. So I just love the work that she does. But there's this model where it doesn't have to go to bottoming out. And in the people she interviews who had significant alcohol issues, not all of them bottom out. Some of them are just like, yeah, it just wasn't working. So I got really committed, and then this followed on, and this healthy change happened, and now I'm in this amazing place. And one of the fears that I think can come up when it comes to doing some of the things in this program, like job crafting or working with your level of happiness, if you know in your heart of hearts that this isn't where you want to be. Like, it's uphill to not hate your job, but you can use some of these strategies to not hate your job so much, to be in more of a grace place. And this fear that, well, what if that keeps me stuck here? What if I don't get miserable enough that I make a change and I'm here in this thing that just really drains me, that really isn't the right thing? And I can understand that fear, and I want to just offer some ideas because they're different models. So one of the models for making change is the hitting bottom and then picking up your life. And humans respond magnificently to emergencies if they're balanced and have reserves to start with. Part of what's going amiss for some people during COVID times is they had their surge response, their, kind of responses where if a tornado hit and things were wiped out, healthy people would be immensely resourceful and effective in doing that. And then they'd crash afterward. They'd be really tired. And some people are having an experience where they got their resourcefulness on and then they crashed, but the situation doesn't allow them to easily restore themselves. And there's a lot of challenge that's happening with that. And so there is the method of, creating a crisis, walking out on the job, behaving badly enough to get fired, just being so miserable that you leave. And that can work, and then you might have that surge response of all this resourcefulness and, wow, you dial something else in. But what often happens is that crash on the other side. So the tension of, I need the money, I need the money, I need the money, and I'm really afraid of the ego death and the change and the anxiety is keeping you at something, while another part of you is like, I don't want to go, I don't like this doesn't work for me. So you're in argument with yourself every day. And then it's like the other side wins. The other side gets the advantage. So squabbling siblings, who's on top can be a real moving target. And so the part of you that doesn't want to work is now depleted and tired and doesn't want to do anything. And so what can happen with the hitting bottom is it gets so painful that you leave, but then you come out on the other side having to deal with how depleted you are, which may look like a long time of sitting on the couch and not being able to make yourself get out there and go to interviews and be on the job, because this one part of yourself that's finally gotten freedom and rest doesn't trust you not to make everything really miserable again if you have a job. So you're at war with yourself, where one part of you is holding on to a bad job and one part of you is fighting for no job. And neither one of those parts is a really good part to have running the show. We ideally are in grace with the part of ourselves that wants to work under the right conditions, and we're not forcing ourselves to do something that is depleting, nor are we indulging the part of ourselves that's just gotten into a procrastination resistance place. So this is different than appropriate rest. Appropriate rest is really important. If you've had a tiring job and that shifts, by all means take some time to replenish. But I'm talking about working with people who 6 months, a year, 2 years on have had a job that they really hated. They kept it for a long time. They finally quit because it was so unbearable or starting to cause health problems. And then they just haven't been able to wrangle themselves to get back in the game. And because of the acute financial stress, they aren't reaching out for help from someone. So they're just in this really stuck place with a financial situation that is creating more and more and more pressure. And you can get a lot of pendulum swings that way, where you overfunction, underfunction, overfunction, underfunction. And it's just not a super great map. It was eye-opening for me when one of my teachers said, the hero's journey is a terrible model for personal growth. And it's not that I don't use that, like when I'm trying to get out of codependency, I'm like, yeah, they're on a hero's journey. I'm going to choose to see them as the hero in their story and resourceful and capable. And sure, they're in a dark time, but they've come to me. I will do my best to give them wise counsel, and then I will release them and trust that they are indeed the hero in their own story. And hey, they'll figure it out. Like that can be a great way to look at people. But for my own journey, the hero's journey has a lot of dark times and a lot of struggle. And it doesn't make a very interesting narrative to be like, yeah, I noticed at a subtle level I just wasn't quite having the health and vitality that I wanted. So I just sort of non-dramatically cut the sugar way down in my life and I'm feeling really good now. Or I just really committed to a moderate walking schedule and now that I'm in the flow, that's feeling really good. Like that's not a really dramatic, interesting, fascinating story of someone losing 50 pounds in 2 months. We like those dramatic stories. So for entertainment, by all means, go with the hero's journey narrative. Go with the survive difficult times. I'll be honest, my taste in literature has kind of moved away from unnecessarily suffering, self-inflicted suffering through lack of health, as often seems to be the plot line. I find that I love, National Geographic stories of like, oh, here's how cool archaeology is revealing things about our past. That's become more to my taste. I may sound incredibly dull in that way. So whatever entertainment you like is fine, but realize there's a model where you can make a change by creating a dramatic situation that requires heroic action, and humans are good at that, and that works. And we're so much more creative and resourceful if we don't let ourselves get depleted. So if you have a job that's just okay, it's not great, It's not horrible. It pays the bills. You'd kind of rather not go. You struggle with yourself a little. I'm all for upgrading that. So the low-hanging fruit is to do some job crafting and see if there's a way that you can come into grace with it. I couldn't do that with engineering, but for me with engineering, it served the purpose until passion pulled me to something else. So there's this idea that pain pushes and passion pulls. And so finding something that you're genuinely passionate or excited or engaged with as a next step is a really great way to get the energy to make a change. And I would argue that really tired people are often not passionate. Now, I'm ridiculously passionate about what I do, so I can be tired and passionate at the same time. But oh my goodness, when I'm not tired, I'm so much more passionate and I'm so much more effective. And so if you're in this place of fearing that if you make it better by what's at your disposal, that's the low-hanging fruit right now, you'll be stuck there forever, I'd invite you to commit to less of the pendulum swing lifestyle and more of the nuanced course correction. So my grand vision for all my clients and people that I love is a really good life that just keeps getting better. And so if your life sucks in some way, it's really good to clean that up. If it's not a good life because of, an abusive relationship or poverty or something you're really struggling with, yeah, let's solve that problem. But once we get to good, I want it to keep getting better, and ideally that just is like, okay, and then we get better, and then we have a more elegant way to do things. We have a more nuanced way. We course correct a little bit. We get healthier physically, emotionally, psychologically. We find new opportunities. There's more grace. We keep workshopping our life. There are more opportunities. That's the destiny path that I want for myself and I want for everyone to have. And this model where you do what you can to make it better in a way of not being so depleted by a bad job, so you have all your resourcefulness, so you're not climbing out of a hole where it's exhausting and terrible and you're so depleted you just want to sit on the couch and it's taking everything you have. Like, I would say if there's a job that you can't shift things that's that depleting, it's an urgent problem to solve. If you're in an abusive work environment, if you're having to work, 80 hours a week and for months and months and months at a time, if there's something that really is putting you systematically into a worse place in terms of your emotional health, your psychological health, your physical health, your well-being, being right with your spirit, if you are on a downward trajectory, I would treat that as an extremely urgent and critical problem to solve, as I would with anything. Someone who has diabetes and isn't managing it, that's an incredibly critical problem because of where the destiny path leads, and it's only going to be harder to solve the problem the further down it spirals. So I'm a fan of, urgently stop the downward spiral if there's something in your life that's doing that. But if at all possible, if there's something that is bearable, use it to leverage being at baseline, because if you have a decent job, you're going to be a lot more confident in a job interview to ask for what you really want. You're going to have a lot more discernment. People in relationships who've gotten really lonely or who are really desperate for something. For some women, they're coming to the end of their reproductive years and they're like, I must find a father for my children. And that's an intense place to be on a first date with someone you just met. And it's really easy to lie to yourself about how good a guy this really is if this dream that you want is something you've tied to having to create a committed relationship. Likewise with money, it gets really messy when you have an economic agenda in the dating. A lot of really big warning flags get ignored if there's an acute economic need and someone looks like they could be an economic provider. And spoiler alert, oftentimes people end up in worse economic situations when they try to sustain romantic relationship to try to deal with that. You end up with oftentimes not very good outcomes in the long run. But with a job, if you're desperate for something else, you're not going to have the discernment in a job interview to really ask hard questions and really assess whether it would be the right thing. If you're starving to death, you're not going to be particularly particular about how agreeable the food is to you. And yet we all know that there are certain things we eat that are more supportive for our bodies. So in a livelihood that's just okay, don't be afraid of creating sustainability there in the meantime. Now, sure, if you have some really deep fears to work through, get some help with that. If you're like, wow, I'm so terrified to change that I'm really not okay with this and I'm making myself be okay, that's totally something to look at. I was really scared to give up my engineering job. I needed the gentle push of getting laid off because they made it a full-time gig. To be honest, I wasn't being a very good engineer there at the end, so I think it was a graceful way where I hadn't behaved badly enough that they were going to fire me, but they certainly weren't that invested in retaining me because my heart and soul was really in my shamanic practice, and I was reluctantly showing up, but they said, hey, we need a full-time person. You can go full-time or get laid off. So I took the layoff, but I needed that push. So I really get that it can be terrifying to change this up. And that's where working with the instincts is really helpful, and getting some support from another person to help you make a good plan and implement it and be accountable and take action and all of that. So it's so much easier to clean up your fear of change in facilitated personal inquiry than it is to crash your job or get so miserable that you leave and then are struggling with the fear. Like, again, those pendulum swings of overfunctioning and underfunctioning, they're just really expensive and exhausting and hard on the soul and the spirit. And a lot of the people I work with are pretty sensitive people. It's not good for them to get buffeted about by the world. I'm not sure it's great for anyone, but the real nuanced, energetically sensitive, empathic, carry the archetype of the healer, amazing people I get to work with, I particularly don't want to see buffeted about the world. And when you do those pendulum swings, there's a lot of buffeting that goes with that. So the invitation is to not try to solve the problem of your fears of leaving through the mechanism of being so miserable that it's unbearable to stay. That is a way that people get out of miserable jobs, but it's really expensive. I started in later years leaving relationships when I could see that they just weren't working and really didn't have a destiny path where it was going to get better, instead of being so attached to them that I waited until I had used up every morsel of love I had for the person and, never wanted to see him again. Like, you can use up every ounce of goodwill in the relationship, but that makes for a pretty ugly breakup usually and a lot of pain. Whereas just leaving something that doesn't work, if you've cleaned up your fears about stepping out of relationship, can be really good. And again, like a romantic relationship, I know I come back to that analogy. Sure, it's good to sit down with a counselor and say, is this fixable? I love this person. I have deep investment. We share a lot of things. This part isn't working. Can we make a better deal where this part will work? And it's a good question to ask about the job that you have now. Is there a way that would make this more sustainable and supportive? Because there might be something you'd be happy to do part-time that doesn't work for you to do full-time anymore. So lots of nuance to this, but I just want to kind of call that out because sometimes people actually have a fear of alleviating suffering in their current situation, that it will get in the way of them being motivated to make a change. And ideally, if you're doing the things that are going to upgrade your experience, you'll actually have more energy on all levels, mental energy, physical energy, psychological energy, to be strategic about making a change. And again, it won't have that urgency of an emergency problem to solve, but if you're solving things and taking action only from, I wait until it's an emergency, I wait until I have a health crisis or a job crisis or an economic crisis or a relationship crisis, that kind of sucks. It's just no fun to keep hitting bottom in your life, and it costs a lot. It costs a lot on a lot of different levels. And so I just want to offer you this invitation to make a deal with yourself that you're going to stay in conversation about where something might be that you're more passionate about, while making the meantime job experience as graceful and non-depleting as possible. It may seem like a waste to workshop your current job to be in grace if you think you won't keep it, but I would argue that the skill set and the awareness and the discernment and the communication and all of those skills that you'll gain in doing that, even if the company closed down and you were done with it tomorrow, are so worthwhile. It's so powerful to implement that skill set because it's something that you can use in anything in your life of, okay, here's the situation. Where are the things that are actually set? I had an experience when I was an intern working really hard, and it was up in Northern California, and by the second year of college, I had a boyfriend, and the second year of college for the summer, I came back and worked the internship. But for the third year, I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And so the owner of the company made me a deal that he would fly me down every other weekend to spend with my boyfriend. I'd work longer days so that I had every other Friday off, and then I could go see him. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that works. It made sense from their point of view. Tickets were like $100 round trip purchased in advance, and it was only like giving me a couple dollars an hour raise, and I was working at the level of their people being paid an engineer salary and an intern salary. So, win-win. Worked out really, really well. My parents were actually a little concerned. They're like, is this giving Katie an unrealistic idea of the work world? And yet that's just kind of the nature of my soul. I managed to negotiate a part-time job in engineering where that was almost unheard of as I was building my practice. There are lots of ways that we may be able to adjust things that we imagine are fixed. And if you have a good collaborative way of going in and talking about them, you may be surprised at something that would be a huge bonus for you that your employer doesn't really care about. It's no skin off their teeth, and they get something that's really good. So I would encourage you to workshop your current job as much as possible to make it as good as possible, unless it's truly toxic and depleting, unless it has you on a destiny path of being in a worse and worse condition the longer you stay in a way that you can't change, in which case make it an urgent problem to get out of there. But if it's just okay, if it's just boring, if it's just not satisfying, but there's a way to do it that doesn't deplete you, it's time well spent to workshop it to make it as good as possible. It's an excellent skill set carrying forward into creating whatever you end up creating after this job. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.